I never thought a night of laughter and champagne would end with me soaked in my own humiliation. My husband threw a drink in my face because he thought I was looking at another man. The room froze for a heartbeat, glasses clinking, murmurs rising like a tide against the walls of the grand ballroom. My dress, once pristine ivory silk, clung to me uncomfortably, cold and sticky. I could feel every eye on me, and more than that, I could feel Ethan's satisfaction radiating in a way that made my stomach twist. He smiled that public, polished smile, the one everyone loved, but his eyes held something sharp and dangerous, a gleam that made it clear this performance was for him alone. I stepped back, my heels clicking unevenly on the marble floor, my hand brushing at the wet fabric. Laughter bubbled around us, forced and polite, but I felt hollow. Ethan's arrogance was loud in a way that made me small, and yet, as I looked at him, something inside me shifted. I noticed the way he preened in front of others, the way he thought everyone, including me, was an audience for his charm. The thought struck me sharply. If he could humiliate me without blinking, then he could be stopped without anyone suspecting. I drifted toward the balcony, the hum of the city below a soft counterpoint to the chaos inside. The night air hit me, and for the first time since the spill, I could breathe. My mind raced, not with tears, but with clarity. Ethan had made a mistake, and that mistake was underestimating me. His arrogance, once a mask of confidence, was now a doorway. I could see the cracks, the small moments of vanity and blind self-importance, and I knew I could use them. Revenge didn't have to be loud or messy, not yet. It only had to be precise. As the party went on without me, I felt the fire start quietly in my chest, not a reckless blaze, but a slow, steady burn. I realized that I wasn't just humiliated, I was awakened. Ethan's public display of control had shown me exactly how little he knew, not just about me, but about the power I could wield. The thought settled in with a dangerous sweetness. Tonight was not the end. It was the first step, and I would make sure he never saw it coming. I slipped out of the party through a quiet side door, my dress still damp from Ethan's drink. The cold night air hit me, sharp and real, and for the first time since the humiliation, I felt a flicker of clarity. I held my head high, forcing myself to walk steadily, even though my hands trembled. I didn't cry. I didn't call attention to myself. All I could think about was understanding what had happened, and how I could turn it around. As soon as I reached my apartment, I called Madison. Hearing her calm, steady voice was like a lifeline. I told her everything. How Ethan had smiled while the drink soaked me. How people whispered. How it felt like the world had watched me crumble. She didn't pity me. She reminded me that his charm in public didn't make him untouchable, and that his arrogance could be used against him. She suggested I watch him carefully, notice his patterns, and wait. I felt the first sparks of determination stir inside me. Over the next few days, I began observing Ethan more closely. At work, he leaned too close to female colleagues, laughed too loudly at his own jokes, and bragged about things that weren't entirely true. He offered help only when it made him look good, and he didn't notice how obvious it all was. I made mental notes, not to expose him immediately, but to understand him. Every slip, every small lie, every show of vanity added to a picture of who he really was. I realized he was predictable in his pride, blind in his need to impress, and completely unaware that I was paying attention. At home, I stayed calm even when he made snide remarks or tried to provoke me. I didn't respond with anger. I watched him carefully, noting how he fumbled small lies and underestimated me at every turn. Each observation made me feel stronger, like I was quietly reclaiming control. Imagining him frustrated, unable to see what I was planning, gave me a strange satisfaction. As the week unfolded, I felt a shift inside myself. I wasn't just the woman humiliated at a party anymore. I was someone who could act with patience, who could observe, plan, and wait. Ethan's arrogance had handed me a weapon, and I intended to use it. Every glance, every interaction, every detail I noticed was a step toward taking back my power, and this time he wouldn't see it coming. I started noticing the little cracks in Ethan's carefully built world. It began with subtle questions about our finances that he dodged or answered vaguely, small inconsistencies in his stories about work trips and meetings. Curiosity turned into suspicion, and suspicion pushed me to look closer. I checked bank statements, cross-referenced receipts, and quietly reviewed emails that seemed harmless at first glance, but hinted at hidden accounts and unexplained transactions. Every discovery felt like pulling a thread that revealed a larger pattern he had worked hard to hide. I didn't confront him. Instead, I kept my observations to myself and let the evidence accumulate. I copied documents, took notes, and saved screenshots, making sure nothing would be traced back to me. I began to see how he manipulated people around him, bending situations to his advantage while maintaining a public image of perfection. The more I found, the clearer it became that his life was built on lies and half-truths, and yet he had no idea that I was watching, that I was piecing it all together carefully. At home, I tested him subtly, dropping hints or questions designed to see his reactions without exposing my hand. Sometimes he tensed, sometimes he laughed nervously, but every response told me more about his weaknesses. I learned which topics made him defensive and which allowed him to relax, which people he feared displeasing and which he thought he could manipulate without consequence. Each observation reinforced my sense of control. I realized he was far more fragile than he appeared, especially when he believed no one was paying attention. As the days passed, tension in the house grew, though he didn't suspect me. I moved through our shared spaces with quiet confidence, letting him display his arrogance while I stayed composed. His gestures became sharper, his smiles less certain, and I could see the small signs of paranoia creeping in. I didn't need to push or confront him. The knowledge I held was enough to make him uneasy. Every detail I recorded, every misstep I observed, strengthened my position. I wasn't acting impulsively. I was building a foundation for something bigger, something precise. Watching him stumble through his lies, unaware of my awareness, gave me a sense of calm power I hadn't felt before. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was steering the story instead of just reacting to it. The imbalance was mine, and I intended to use it carefully, making sure that when the moment came, he wouldn't see what was coming until it was too late. I ran into Derek unexpectedly at the office one morning. We hadn't spoken much in the past, but there was always a quiet respect between us. He greeted me with a warm smile, and something about the ease of his presence felt like a safe harbor in the chaos of my life. We talked about projects and deadlines at first, but soon the conversation turned personal. He noticed the tension I carried, the weight of things left unsaid, and he didn't judge or pry. He simply listened, offering steady support and a subtle reminder that I didn't have to face everything alone. I felt a spark of relief and a sense of being understood in a way I hadn't felt for months. The opportunity to test Ethan's reactions came sooner than I expected. A high-profile gala was announced, one full of industry leaders and socialites, and I chose to attend alone. I dressed carefully, not to attract attention recklessly, but to command it subtly. The moment I arrived, I sensed Ethan's discomfort. He appeared at the entrance later, scanning the room until his eyes found me. There was a flicker of something, possessiveness, jealousy, maybe even fear of losing control. He tried to mask it with charm, but his posture and the quickness of his movements betrayed him. I stayed poised, circulating with confidence, greeting colleagues and acquaintances with genuine warmth, careful to remain just out of his reach. Throughout the evening, Ethan's controlling tendencies escalated. He hovered, questioned subtle choices I made, and tried to redirect conversations in ways that asserted his authority. Instead of reacting, I mirrored calm confidence. I laughed when appropriate, listened attentively, and carried myself with a quiet assurance that seemed to frustrate him without effort. His attempts at manipulation only reinforced my resolve. I could see him unraveling in small, almost imperceptible ways, and it gave me clarity about the power I held when I refused to respond with fear or anger. As I navigated the gala, I realized that my own strength had shifted. I wasn't acting impulsively. Each interaction, each decision was deliberate. The plan I had been quietly forming grew sharper, more intentional. I understood now that revenge wasn't about confrontation in the moment. It was about precision, timing, and knowing when to let someone reveal their own flaws. The confidence I carried, the calm way I observed Ethan's reactions, felt like armor. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving his games. I was preparing to take control, and every step I took was moving me closer to that moment. I arranged a meeting with Olivia Grant, a trusted lawyer and financial advisor. Her office smelled faintly of leather and old books, a place that felt organized and safe, the kind of environment where clarity could take root. I explained my situation carefully, keeping my voice steady while letting her guide me through the legal and financial angles. She asked questions that forced me to be precise, and as we went through accounts and documents, I began to see the full scope of Ethan's deception. There were hidden investments, transfers to accounts in other names, and personal loans he had never disclosed. Some of the money went to cover his private indulgences, and other sums seemed designed to manipulate family perceptions, creating an image of success that wasn't real. Each discovery felt like peeling back another layer of his carefully maintained facade. I made notes quietly, memorizing details that would be useful later. There was no rush, no shouting matches, only the calm collection of truths that he had tried to bury. With Olivia's guidance, I began to understand how to position myself strategically. Subtle hints here, careful comments there, actions that seemed casual, but planted seeds in the minds of people around him. The goal wasn't confrontation yet, it was preparation. Each move had to be measured, precise, so that when the moment came, it would feel inevitable and undeniable. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and caution. I was finally in a position to influence outcomes without exposing my hand too soon. Even as I worked through these details, a tension simmered inside me. I had to balance the anger that burned quietly with the need for careful planning. The temptation to act immediately was strong, but I reminded myself that patience would multiply the effect of any revelation. Every misstep by Ethan could be used, but only if I stayed observant and deliberate. The process demanded focus, and I found that the control over my own actions gave me more power than reacting to his arrogance ever had. Leaving Olivia's office, I felt both cautious and energized. The path ahead was clearer, though still delicate. Ethan's lies, once invisible, were now tangible, and I had the tools to expose them without alerting him. Each small strategic step I took built toward a larger plan, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving from being a victim to being someone who could shape the outcome. The tension was real, but so was the sense of control, and I knew that every detail mattered in the story I was quietly writing. The night of the business event arrived, and I stepped into the room with a quiet focus. The space was filled with executives, clients, and colleagues, all buzzing with conversation and anticipation. I wore a dress that was understated yet elegant, the kind that didn't scream for attention, but drew eyes naturally. I stayed aware of Ethan from the start, noting his posture, the way he smiled too quickly, and the little tics that betrayed his nerves. He thought this evening would be another display of his charm, but I had other plans. Madison was there beside me, moving through the crowd with ease, offering casual remarks that seemed innocent but planted doubt. She asked subtle questions about Ethan's recent deals, hints that encouraged others to reconsider his claims without realizing it. Each comment was carefully placed, a small crack in his otherwise polished image. I observed silently, letting the interactions play out while keeping my expression calm. It felt almost like watching a game unfold where I knew all the moves in advance. As the night went on, Ethan's confidence started to waver. A client paused when Madison mentioned an inconsistency. A colleague hesitated when he boasted about a project, and I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He tried to recover with a smile, to laugh it off, but it didn't land. Each failed attempt added to the subtle unraveling I had been building, and I felt a strange thrill in the control I held over the situation without ever raising my voice or confronting him directly. I mingled with key people, asking questions that seemed casual but nudged them to connect dots they hadn't noticed before. It was careful, patient work, But the effect was clear. Ethan's influence was faltering in real time. His charm, which had always been his shield, was losing power, and I could see it reflected in the way he shifted in the room, trying to regain authority that slipped further with every interaction. As the event wound down, I felt a rising sense of empowerment. I hadn't needed to confront him, shout, or make a scene. The quiet strategy, the careful planting of small truths, had done the work. I could feel my confidence solidifying, a new sense of authority within myself. Watching Ethan struggle while I remained composed showed me that control didn't require aggression. It required patience, clarity, and knowing exactly when and how to act. For the first time, I realized the power I could wield with restraint, and the satisfaction of seeing it unfold was deeply rewarding. I invited Ethan to our home under the pretense of needing to talk about something important. The house felt quieter than usual, the kind of silence that makes every sound sharper. I had my phone hidden in a spot that captured everything, ready to record without him noticing. I stayed calm, choosing my words carefully, letting the tension build naturally. I didn't rush or raise my voice. I let him believe he was still in control while steering the conversation where I wanted it to go. I started with small observations, mentioning incidents and contradictions in his stories that seemed minor but carried weight. I didn't accuse directly. Instead, I let the implications linger, watching his reactions. A raised eyebrow, a quick glance, a tightening jaw, all of it told me more than any confession ever could. I spoke of honesty, of trust, and of respect, framing each comment as if it were concern rather than confrontation. The careful balance made him defensive without realizing the trap he was stepping into. As the conversation progressed, I dropped hints about the financial discrepancies, the hidden communications, and the personal deceptions I had uncovered. I spoke in measured tones, keeping my expressions neutral, letting the facts themselves carry the weight. Ethan's composure cracked in subtle ways at first. A stiffened posture, a flash of irritation. But as the implications became clearer, his reactions grew sharper. His voice rose, his words became hurried and sharp, and I could see the frustration building behind the charm he usually wielded effortlessly. I didn't respond with anger or panic. I remained composed, observing him as he struggled to regain his usual confidence. Every attempt he made to intimidate or deflect only confirmed the effectiveness of my strategy. I realized the power of remaining calm in the face of his rage. It amplified the impact of the truth without me needing to push further. After the conversation, I began sharing carefully selected pieces of evidence with people who mattered, close colleagues, trusted friends, and family members. Each disclosure was precise, enough to plant doubt and force reflection without overexposure. The truth began to ripple outward quietly, letting those who needed to see it form their own opinions, while Ethan remained unaware of how much had already surfaced. The sense of control, the quiet unfolding of consequences, made me feel a steady, growing satisfaction. I understood now that exposing him didn't require a dramatic confrontation. It required patience, precision, and the confidence to let the facts speak while keeping myself above the chaos. I packed my things quietly, leaving the apartment that had once felt like a home but now only carried memories of control and tension. Every item I placed in boxes felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a small step toward freedom. I found a new apartment, one that reflected the life I wanted to live, bright, open, and mine. The first night alone, I walked through each room slowly, letting the silence settle around me, realizing for the first time in months that it was a silence I had chosen, not one forced upon me. I began rebuilding my life deliberately. I reached out to colleagues, attended industry events, and reconnected with friends who had drifted away over time. Each conversation, each meeting, was a reminder that my world extended beyond the shadow of Ethan's presence. I felt a growing confidence in myself and my decisions. Slowly, I began to enjoy the freedom of making choices without hesitation or fear, of planning my days according to my own priorities, and of trusting my instincts without second-guessing. Ethan tried to reach me, first with calls, then messages that hinted at guilt and concern. He suggested meeting, proposed compromises, and even subtly implied that he could make things easier for me. I responded with firmness, setting boundaries he could not cross. I refused to engage in his attempts to manipulate or draw me back into his control. Each refusal reinforced my sense of self and reminded me that my power no longer depended on his acknowledgement or approval. Professionally, I focused on building achievements that were visible and undeniable. Projects that had been stalled, ideas I had shelved, all came back to life. I presented my work confidently, gained recognition, and watched opportunities open that Ethan had assumed would always belong to him. The satisfaction was quiet but intense, a knowledge that while he attempted to maintain his image and influence, my accomplishments spoke for themselves, leaving him exposed in ways he could neither manage nor anticipate. Moving forward, my days became measured and deliberate. I controlled my environment, my interactions, and my goals. Each success, each connection, each firm boundary strengthened the foundation of my life. Ethan's attempts to interfere only reminded me how far I had come, and the contrast between his desperation and my growing stability fueled a sense of calm empowerment. I realized revenge didn't need drama or spectacle. It was in living well, excelling quietly, and leaving him unable to predict or challenge the woman I had become. The night of the charity gala arrived, and the venue was filled with laughter, music, and the soft clinking of glasses. I moved through the crowd with ease, greeting familiar faces and making new connections, fully aware of Ethan's presence on the other side of the room. He had been invited, and I knew he would try to maintain his usual charm, presenting himself as confident and untouchable. Instead, his attempts to impress fell flat, small missteps and contradictions slipping through as people noticed details he had never revealed. I watched from a distance as influential figures exchanged subtle glances, whispered questions, and raised eyebrows. Ethan's composure began to crack without any direct action from me. Someone mentioned a discrepancy in a business deal. Another brought up a story that contradicted what he had boasted earlier. Each interaction chipped away at the carefully constructed image he relied on. His smiles became tighter, his laughter forced, and I could see the discomfort growing with every passing moment. It was a slow unraveling, almost invisible to those focused on the celebration, yet clear to anyone paying attention. I stayed poised, circulating among guests with effortless grace. No one suspected I had anticipated every outcome. No one realized that the evening had been designed to allow his flaws to emerge naturally. The sense of control was intoxicating. I felt the power of observation, the satisfaction of knowing the truth while remaining above the fray. My focus was on the people who mattered, making connections, strengthening my network, and letting Ethan's arrogance collapse on its own weight. After the event, I requested a private moment with him. The room was empty now, the energy from the gala replaced with quiet tension. I spoke clearly, calmly, pointing out the consequences of his actions and the ways he had misrepresented himself to those around us. I didn't shout or plead. I let the facts speak, letting him process the humiliation that had been growing throughout the evening. His reactions ranged from frustration to disbelief, and yet I remained steady, unwavering, unshaken by his anger or attempts at justification. Leaving that conversation, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. Ethan, once imposing and controlling, was now isolated, his influence diminished, and his power over me gone. The years of tension, betrayal, and careful strategy culminated in this moment of quiet victory. The weight lifted from my shoulders, replaced with clarity, confidence, and the knowledge that I had reclaimed my life completely. For the first time in a long time, the future felt entirely mine. I woke up that morning feeling a lightness I hadn't known in years. The past months of careful planning, observation, and patience had brought me here. I met Derek for brunch, and his smile was easy, the kind that made ordinary moments feel warm and full. We laughed over shared stories, talked about work, and reminisced about small victories, the kind that felt personal but mattered deeply. Surrounding us were friends who had supported me quietly, people who reminded me that life could be joyful, genuine, and unforced. Later, we gathered at my apartment, a small celebration with close friends. The space was alive with conversation, music, and the kind of laughter that comes without pretense. I felt grounded, comfortable in my own skin, and free from the constant tension that had defined so many of my days. We toasted to new beginnings, to independence, and to the strength that had carried me through the hardest moments. Each smile, each shared story, reaffirmed that the life I had chosen was real, earned, and fully mine. News of Ethan's failures began to reach me quietly. Colleagues who had once flattered him now spoke cautiously, reassessing past claims and interactions. Family members questioned inconsistencies, and social connections that had once elevated his image started to distance themselves. I didn't need to push or explain. The consequences unfolded naturally, the web of truth catching up to him while I remained removed and composed. It was a subtle but undeniable reminder of how isolation follows deception when the world finally sees it clearly. Sitting alone later, I reflected on everything that had happened. Betrayal had cut deep, yet it had forced me to recognize my own strength and resilience. The sense of justice wasn't about revenge alone. It was about reclaiming control, understanding my worth, and refusing to let manipulation dictate my life. Each moment of patience, each strategic choice had not only protected me, but allowed me to grow in ways I hadn't imagined. I looked out over the city lights, thinking about how far I had come. The journey had been difficult, but it had reshaped me, taught me to trust my instincts, and revealed the power of calm determination. The sense of closure settled quietly, not in loud triumph, but in the knowledge that I had rebuilt myself completely. Freedom, confidence, and clarity filled me, and for the first time, the future felt wide open and entirely my own.